Hi everyone, it's Raina. So, with the sad news of the passing of Shannen Doherty, I thought it would be an interesting idea to look at her natal chart. I did watch 90210, even though I was older than probably the typical viewer, but I'm sure there were people in their 20s like me who tuned in eagerly each week, at least for the first two or three seasons. And when I was finding out about Shannen earlier today, I discovered that she really wasn't that much younger than me. Um, she was born in 1971. And so when she started that show, but when she started the show, or when she began, I think the show began in 1990, if I'm not mistaken. So she would have still been in her late teens at the time, and I was in my mid 20s when the show debuted. So I'm going to look at the chart as a whole and kind of look at her inner planets, inner points, to see what comprised her nature. And she had a reputation of being difficult, if you know what that means. That's kind of a vague term. I have my own feelings about this and what this may entail, but obviously I didn't know her personally, and the rest of it is tabloid rumors. But I'll address that as well as her acting in general. Like, can you look at a certain area in the chart to see what people are doing or are meant to do? And, just anything else that I think of that may come up. So, Shannen was an Aries sun sign, and and had the moon in Scorpio. Well, first of all, Aries and Scorpio as a combination, I think, is super tough. I believe I have done this sun moon combination on my channel because I've done so many different sun moon combinations. The reason that it's difficult is because, first of all, the fire and water elements are both very emotional in their own way. The fire is emotional in what we would call an objective way. Okay, I'm a Sagittarian sun sign, and the other sun sign is Leo, and fire signs tend to be, always like passionate about certain, issues in life and their dreams and everything. So emotions are generated, but it's not necessarily about, oh, this happened to me when I was 5 years old or whatever. That would be more of the water energy. And she had the moon in Scorpio, which I do believe is probably the most difficult moon sign to have. I think Pisces is also difficult, but for a different way that I'm not going to, get into. The reason that I believe the moon in Scorpio is the most difficult moon to have is because Scorpio represents the shadow side of life, the eighth house, which, by the way, she had a stellium. She had 3 planets there, and 2 of them were personal planets. But the whole idea of the shadow elements are difficult emotions. And, so happiness, elation, joy, humor, that is not part of the 8th house. It's rage and abuse and, like trauma. And, the 8th house can be sex, but it could be some sort of sexual trauma. Anything that's life and death can be the 8th house. No wonder it's the house of transformation. So, one thing that the Sun and that Aries and Scorpio have in common is the rulership of Mars. Now, I just shut the door. For Aries, this is the only planet that it is ruled by. Scorpio is ruled not only by Mars, but also by Pluto, which is the god of the underworld. So we can see right, straight away that her moon sign being ruled by these two planets that in Vedic astrology are considered malefic planets, that set her up for emotional issues. I'm not going to say psychological issues per se, but emotional in terms of like how, the lens that we look through life. It's hard to talk about the moon that way because when we think about feelings, we kind of like divorce it from our mind. And yet I really think that Mercury, and that's what represents the mind, and the moon sometimes can be almost interchangeable in how they affect the emotions and how they express the emotions. So in Shannen's case, her Mercury was in Taurus. Now, one thing that the moon and Mercury have in common in her particular case is that the signs that they are in are both fixed signs. Taurus is a fixed sign, and Scorpio is actually the opposite sign of Taurus. The reason that this is important is that fixed signs, and the other fixed signs are Leo and Aquarius, tend to be very stubborn, and they can stay deeply entrenched in whatever it is that they represent. In this case, it's the person's emotional nature. It's the person's memories. Mercury can be the mind, the memories, the way, the opinions that the person holds. So if a person experiences trauma when they are young, if that person has the moon in a fixed sign, Mercury in a fixed sign, it's going to be very difficult for that person to forgive because they're going to think about that person who did them wrong, and they are going to be, it's going to, their feelings, which are going to obviously tend towards the negative, will be crystallized, and they will likely be stuck in place. I feel that in general, difficult people are people that are very rigid and they lack the ability to forgive. Forgiveness is a very misunderstood term. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but in short, to forgive doesn't mean to forget, and it doesn't mean to make excuses for somebody else's bad behavior. To me, what forgiveness is that we look at another person as a child of God, and we see their innocence that is distorted through negative behavior, and we realize that something must be going on with them to cause them to behave that way. In other words, we don't just demonize people and then completely like block any kind of regard for them as fellow human beings. it doesn't mean that we have to even deal with such people, even if they're very close to us in some way. But the point is that we don't have a lot of bitterness towards them. We don't blame them for destroying our life. We take responsibility for our life, because ultimately this is either a random chaotic universe where things are just happening and there's no rhyme or reason to them, or the world on a deeper level is in divine order. And so everything that happens, there must be a reason for it. We may, even if we don't know what it is, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a reason for it. And a person can be a victim, and yet they don't allow that to define their life. And the players that created that circumstance where they were the victim don't loom large, and kind of control them in an abstract way. So it's possible that Shannen was a victim, and I will go into why I think this is. Typically, when you're young, the perpetrator, if you will, especially if we're talking about, chronic situations, not just a one-time shot, but something that happens on a regular basis, it is going to be a parental figure or a surrogate parental figure. Yes, sometimes there are other people that may do things, like other family members or friends of the family or teachers and things like that. But I think even from day one, it's typically going to be a parent or a step parent, and it might not be common knowledge that that parent was abusive. When you have the moon in Scorpio or any water sign, the person will tend to be very secretive emotionally, meaning, and part of this with Scorpio in particular is a desire to maintain the upper hand and appear invulnerable. Scorpio people despise weakness. And I think that's one of the Achilles heels of Scorpio, is the inability to be vulnerable. And there might be Scorpios who can display this, like if they have a moon in Pisces or Pisces rising, for instance, they may be a lot more, I was going to use the word humble, might not be the appropriate word, but they might be able to show that side of themselves. But in general, a Scorpio person, and I'm talking about even if it's not the sun, but it could be the moon or even the ascendant, wants to appear powerful. And they also want to associate with people who are powerful. If they are around somebody who shows vulnerability, I'm not talking about somebody who is constantly complaining of victimhood, but somebody who really, maybe emotionally healthy and talks about some of their challenges, a Scorpio person might get triggered. A sun or moon Scorpio person might even develop a negative attitude towards that person, but they don't realize, that might be the shadow of such a person, that they are afraid of their own powerlessness. So this is one of the reasons why you will sometimes find water signs, and Scorpio is no exception, and Scorpio might even be specifically where you see this a lot, where they are playing games as kind of a way to test people's loyalty or whatnot. Because one of the big fears of Scorpio is abandonment or cheating, which is actually a form of abandonment, you could say. Any kind of deception where they may trust somebody who is not respecting the faith that they're putting in them and is cheating on them. This is one of the reasons why people with a prominent Scorpio tend to have trust issues, and that can also doom a relationship. So if you are listening to this and you are a sun or moon in Scorpio, or even an ascendant in Scorpio, not to mention, I mean, if you're a sun in Scorpio, you may have inner planets like Venus in Scorpio, and that can also show up in relationships in a negative way. But if you have a prominent Scorpio like that, you may agree with me that it's not easy for you to kind of let go in relationships. You tend to hold back. So even if Shannen was the victim of abuse in her childhood, she probably would be the kind of person who wouldn't readily admit that. And this is something that I wouldn't be surprised if I'm correct about this, because, I used to read tabloids and, People magazine when, during the period when she was, at her peak career-wise in the 90s and going into the 2000s. And I don't remember a lot of, deep interviews where she talked at length about her past. I could be wrong about that, but I don't remember it. So it is possible that she kind of kept a lot of that to herself, and yet her sun in Aries is very straightforward, very blunt. So that might have been inner tension, because there might have been a part of her that wanted to be the way that her sun sign typically presents itself, and yet her moon in Scorpio held her back. Sometimes with the Scorpio energy, it can get pretty dark sometimes. There could be taboos. An example of that with the sun sign of Scorpio is Mackenzie Phillips, who revealed that her father, who was, well-respected singer and, songwriter, that she had incest with him. And when that story first broke out, a lot of people denied it or, accused her of making something up like that. And I see that things have changed, and a lot of people are believing her, because I was recently, for some reason, I came across her material and I saw a lot different tone to a lot of the comments. But she, brought something out. Can you imagine the strength that she had to possess, because there probably was deep shame connected to that. And so that's kind of what I was hinting at, is the taboo or the shame, the shameful kinds of things. Obviously, incest is a very extreme example, but sometimes, like, for instance, sexual abuse, as commonplace as it still is something that can be very difficult to, make public. But, the bigger point in all of this is that for somebody who has a prominent Scorpio, privacy is really valued. We live in an age of overshare, where people, maybe they're seeking attention. They, tell everything. And so there are actually still people, including celebrities out there, who do not wish to do that. And I I have a feeling that she was one of them. And so I just want to make it clear that anything that I talk about here is not an accusation um, for anybody that she may be related to or in her life when she was younger, because that is not something that you can absolutely prove looking at somebody's chart. But we can at least talk about this in terms of like the reputation that she had personality wise and what may have shaped that. Her son was in, her son's formed a square to Mars, which is the ruler of Aries. And when I see this in people's charts, I think of the scrappy underdog, the person who is motivated by a sense of maybe not feeling good enough. And this is actually quite surprising to me, because I do feel that Scorpio, and you could even say Aries, are some of the strongest signs of the zodiac, maybe even the bravest signs because of that Mars rulership. Mars being the god of war, you think of the warrior going into this battle, while life can be a daily battle for such people. And they might be their own worst enemy. There's no question about that. Because one of the things I have noticed about people with a prominent Aries is that they may tend to see life as rather dull unless there's some kind of sparring match going on, meaning that they like to mix it up a little bit. They like to have some kind of, you could even say that they might start drama just to have something to, distract themselves with or whatever. But it really is that Mars tendency to kind of like champion causes, champion the underdog. Well, in this case, having that square from the sun to Mars, she may have felt like an underdog. She may have felt insecure, and it probably made her overly competitive. This is what happens with a square between the sun and Mars. The person is overcompensating due to insecurity, and therefore they want to be the, like if in the workplace, this can really show up as somebody who wants to be the best worker. When you do something like that, you have to understand that it's going to, trigger coworkers, because they're going to feel like you're trying to best them, make them look bad. So that, if I think about the set of 90210, where, her character, Brenda, was definitely the centerpiece of the whole series. She may have wanted to remain kind of like in that top dog role by any means necessary. Now, interestingly, Jenny Garth, who played, oh my gosh, Kelly, was, or I shouldn't say was, is an Aries herself. And another person who is an Aries was the guy who played Steve. Luke Perry, who passed away sadly a few years ago, was a Libra, which is the opposite sign of Aries. So there were, these signs, were plentiful on this series. And they're cardinal signs, Aries and Libra. And that means that these are kind of take charge signs. So there might have been some competitive undertones in the series as a whole. I don't remember there being that kind of dynamic. However, I do remember Shannon's name coming up in the tabloids for, you know, other cast members having issues with her. I will say that sometimes the person who is labeled difficult, they may be the one who has their own vision and they just simply want to do things their own way, but they're not necessarily a bad person. So I certainly am not trying to imply that with Shannon. I just wanted to point out that I think that she may have had a hard time getting a hold of her emotions because her sun sign in Aries is very like to the point, and what you see is what you get. And this is one of the appealing things about Aries is that's very immediate. It's the first sign, the first house, and it isn't something that is you know, like Scorpio, where hiding and you know, kind of being secretive is the norm. I think when people have a lot of kind of jacked up, mixed inner planets, it can lead to inconsistency in the persona or personality, and I think in Shannon's case, this was certainly true. I don't know, you know, that emoji that's like that, you know, I really don't know how they characterize it, but it's kind of like confused or I use that one a lot because I think it's funny looking, but it also is very accurate and, you know, it's descriptive. And I think that Shannon certainly had these characteristics because her Mercury was in Taurus, her Venus was in Pisces, and her Mars was in Capricorn. Yikes. And her rising sign was Virgo. So the water signs and the earth signs are feminine signs, and she actually possessed multiple of these. Come to think of it, besides her sun sign, everything else was earth and water. I really didn't even pay attention to that initially. Her rising sign was Virgo. So Virgo is a mutable earth sign, and so that means her ruler was Mercury. And you can also go by her sun sign and say it was Mars. So when, you know, people who, or we could say women who have Virgo rising, they will tend to be what I would call nondescript. What I mean by that is that nobody will ever probably say, wow, they are really amazing dressers, or they are amazing, like, even like their physical appearance will tend, the women will tend not to wear a ton of makeup. They will tend to be very minimalist in how they dress. They might dress down, be less flamboyant. A Leo rising, you know, by contrast, might be somebody who wears very bright colors like red or gold or, you know, satin, something that's sparkly, you know, sequins, and really calls attention to themselves. Virgo is nondescript. It's very modest. Let's put it that way. And I remember really liking this style. I wouldn't say that she invented it, but she certainly promoted it by being on a popular show. And this would be around 1990, where she would wear these flowered dresses that were kind of loose and fell below the knee with Doc Martens. I'm sure some of you who are on the older side know exactly what I'm talking about. And I was like, oh man, I want this. I never did end up getting all of that, but you know, maybe I can start the trend again. What do you think? So, I think it's hard for somebody whose sun is in Aries to have a lot of earth and water, because Aries is so impatient and so like very enthusiastic, and the earth element can, be very grounding, which isn't bad. But for a fire sign, it reminds me of like when you throw dirt on a fire to put it out. Just like I've said, water puts out fire. So when you're a fire sign and somebody else is a water sign, they have that power to dampen your passions, because they may be a naysayer and they may tell you that something isn't going to work. So what happens when you have this within yourself? Well, it can be something that is kind of like inconsistent, hypocritical. I mean, if somebody knows you well, they may go, well, wait, you act like this, but you actually say you want that. And the person may not be able to kind of articulate why they're like that, because they might be like, beats the hell out of me. I don't know. Um, but anyway, what I would say is that with Mercury in Taurus, she may have been somebody who is very practical in her ideas, not necessarily somebody who is prone to kind of daydreaming and thinking about things that were not really, solid, and things that currently she was familiar with. Venus in Pisces can, this is, Venus is exalted in Pisces. So people who have Venus in Pisces, they actually have the Venus sign that is the most, um, kind of like exemplifying what Venus stands for as far as love is concerned. And it is love that has no requirements attached to it. And that sounds really great, because, you know, unconditional love and all of that stuff, that sounds so spiritual. Pisces is the most spiritual sign. However, in personal relationships, it can be a shit show, to say the least. And people with Venus and Pisces can tend to get into relationships where the other person is a bit of a project. They're going to show that other person that they are lovable. So somebody with Venus and Pisces may have a tendency to be attracted to people who have problems. And I honestly do not know Shannen's love life enough, or very much at all, to be able to point out how this may have been accurate. So in any case, she may, because she was in her 50s when she passed away, she may have kind of matured to the point where she was able to discern what was better for her than, like being able to say, okay, I'm going to love this person, but that doesn't mean that I have to move in with him. I don't have to get married to him to prove that I love him or to prove that he's lovable. And it's like protecting oneself. People who are Aries tend to be, like I said, impatient, and they can be rash in, how they go about doing things. And that can obviously lead to, a lot of negative consequences, and making poor decisions. Shannen actually had a trine between the moon and Venus, which means that, and this is because she had her moon and Venus in 2 water signs. So there was that free-flowing energy, cooperative energy. And that means somebody who has an easy time giving and receiving love. This is very good for relationships. When somebody has a square or an opposition between these 2 planets, it wouldn't surprise me that they have a hard time getting close to somebody else. But this suggests that she was more open in that sense. Mars in Capricorn can be very calculating. It can be very strategic, or somebody who's good at strategy. So, calculating in terms of career moves, certainly, because Capricorn rules the 10th house of career. And then with her ascendant in Virgo, could be hardworking, somebody who just, that's their sense of identity, is being productive and all of that. So looking at her chart, I would look at the 1st house and the 4th houses in particular for hints that she may have been raised in an environment that was not particularly nurturing. Okay, in her 1st house, she had Pluto here. This tends to be a very brutalizing influence, and almost like the person comes into this lifetime because, you can look at the chart as a never-ending cycle. The 12th house, which is on the other side of the ascendant, is the past life. It's the womb state. And then we get to the 1st house, and she had a conjunction between she had a conjunction between Pluto and the ascendant, so that can actually affect the person's appearance and mannerisms. So she was like an honorary Scorpio rising. And when people have Pluto in the 1st house, they may have very penetrating eyes that can look right through people and intimidate them. So it's very possible that other people's first impression of her was not particularly pleasant, that she may have had an intimidating presence that kind of unnerved other people and made them less likely to warm up to her. And because of this, that may have reinforced, self-concepts that were not particularly positive within herself. Well, obviously self-concepts are self. And so it's like kind of this vicious circle. And she was probably a very good read on other people. She actually, in the 8th house, which is Scorpio's and Pluto's domain, she had the Sun, she had Mercury, and she had Saturn. Mercury in particular, because it is that the mind, it's like a penetrative mind. Even though it's in Taurus, I now have to acknowledge that it's deeper than I originally thought, being in the 8th house. So this can be the person who has an uncanny ability to kind of really tap into other people at a psychological level. If a person who has this ability has to be very careful with how they use it, because they might use it in a manipulative way to further their own interests. So she may have experienced abuse at the hands of someone, and it might have been extremely, brutal. But we do have to acknowledge that, some of these children that are in Hollywood, there are things that are going on that can make some of them in the business. You think about Britney Spears, for example. Like even mind control and things like that. Pluto can be this trauma. So maybe even like trauma-based mind control. I'm not saying that she experienced MK Ultra herself, but Hollywood as a whole does seem to be this place where that is rampant, and there's probably a very good reason for it that has to do with the rest of us trying to get us, brainwashed into thinking certain things about life. So anyway, she had Pluto in this area, and it was forming a conjunction with the ascendant. She also had Uranus here. So Uranus in the first house, I'm talking about in terms of her early childhood, may have been that there were a lot of disruptions. Okay. Now, I do remember that she was on Little House on the Prairie, and that was when she was very young. It would have to be like early 80s. I could be wrong about that. It might have been closer to the mid 80s. And it might have been like a sequel, like the next Little House, the next chapter. I remember I think I saw one of those episodes, and it was I thought it was not up to par with the original series, And I don't even know how much Michael Landon had to do with it. So she was part of that. I don't know if she was part of the original Little House. But in any case, Hollywood itself has been a place where children have been abused. I don't know what age she began in show business. A lot of these future adult stars started out as child stars. And some had limited popularity, or, they didn't seem to capitalize on their earlier fame, and they kind of faded into obscurity. But obviously, if Shannen had been doing it from early on, she just kept going, and that was different. That can also speak to the strength of character, or, the individual person's strength within themselves. Some children are extremely fragile. So, and that, and that has nothing to do with abuse either, because, well, it could, but it doesn't have to, because you can have multiple siblings born into the same family, and they may have even experienced the same abuse. And for some, it's traumatic, but they move on, and for some, it defines their life. And, they can spiral downwards because it just like keeps building upon itself. Maybe they can't let it go for some reason. So Uranus here might be like an insecure attachment to a parent. Even though the first house aren't parents, it's that early environment. And I do feel that it could have something to do with show business. I don't know the exact age she got into it. In the third house, she had she had Neptune, and she had Jupiter in conjunction. Well, Neptune can be anything that is very imaginative, and it can involve artistic creations, and Jupiter can be things that are lucky, things that expand the person. In the third house, I would put acting. I'm sure there will be some people that argue with me. I had somebody argue with me about Mercury being in the third house or something, saying that that wasn't singing or stuff, but I do feel that it can be extended to that, and In the third house, I would even say like theater, anything that is creative. And like, for instance, in her fifth house, she had the North Node at 21 degrees of Aquarius. So to me, that is more of the house of the artist per se, meaning that the person is creating the very art. Well, Shannen didn't write movie scripts or TV scripts to the best of my knowledge, so this would be more about her kind of communicating that dialogue. And the third house is the house of communication. And so it could be with Neptune here, a creative or like a unreal, which fiction is unreal, type of communication. In the fourth house of home and family, she had Mars. That can be that the home life was volatile. Worst case scenario, though, there was domestic violence. There was violence within the home, but it might have been where there was a lot of conflict, not a lot of peace. And looking at her Mars and the aspects that it makes, one of them is a square to Uranus, which can indicate a very rebellious nature. That does not mean that the person is a problem personality. It can be more self-destructive and thrill-seeking, where the person likes to drive fast. But it is a square, so it does suggest that the person they might be doing it to act out. If they had an overly, maybe if they have come from a background that was very authoritarian. Now, for an Aries person, if they're raised with an authoritarian parent, that could be a very easy, predictable example of conflict between them and such a parent. And because Aries, is the ruler of the house of self, and Aries is like, their own person. So even if they acknowledge that somebody is older than them and has more power in that relationship, it still won't make the child, an Aries child may be defiant, in other words. And with Mars in the fourth house, the parent may be like my way or the highway in this household. The fourth house can be the mother, so it's possible that this maybe the mother is an Aries. I don't know about her family. Now that I think about it, I thought that she came from a Christian family, but I don't remember. Now, this could be something that coupled with Pluto in the first house may have been kind of like the first lessons of her life of the darkness of human nature. And because Aries can be a very positive sign, that can be, quite disappointing, actually. And so that's why I think that square between her Sun and Mars is so important, because she may feel like she's always had to fight. And sometimes people exaggerate that and they bring drama to their relationships. And so it is possible that she did, but she may not have intended to do so. But it followed her nonetheless. But it could be that it followed her just because, she has a square between Mars and Chiron, and that can indicate the person that is doesn't feel like they can express, or they can be, I was going to say express their anger, because Mars can be our anger. And when you have Mars in Capricorn, it's actually a good thing. I have Mars in Capricorn because the person typically will not fly off the handle. They won't typically have that kind of volatile emotional nature that gets angry at a drop of a hat. But don't get it twisted, you know. That doesn't mean that the person can never get angry, but it won't tend to be something that is out of their control. And she did have a trine, which is which is the easiest aspect between both Mars and Saturn and Mars and Pluto. So that may be especially great for a person's work habits, where the person might be very hardworking, and they have like a really balanced sense of being able to do things that are self-empowering. Whereas some people, the things that they're doing kind of work against them. So in this case, it's like constructive behavior, bottom line. Now, she had an opposition between the moon and Saturn. And this is something that I have as well. This can be a parental figure. Saturn can represent the father, but it really is the authority figure. I wouldn't limit it to one parent. That is a dampening influence. Saturn is very restrictive. So the person, no, specifically here, it could have been the mother. And the mother can be very cold, or somebody who doesn't accept the child emotionally, or doesn't kind of nurture the child. And so they feel that, so they kind of have those attributes as well, where they find it hard to nurture others, because I'm talking about in an openly, like a warm sort of way, because of how they were raised. But it's important to note that even if somebody has difficulties because of how it was for them, it doesn't mean that they can't show that they care in their own way. And sometimes people judge others who are not very emotionally, like emotive, or, don't say I love you to their partner. Maybe they feel more comfortable by doing nice things than by, maybe they're not even that physically affectionate. I'm not saying this about Shannen, because she did have that trine between the moon and Venus, but just talking about in general. And something that I want to point out too that I think is very interesting is that Shannen had an opposition between her Venus and her ascendant, and a square between her Venus and the midheaven. Talking about the midheaven, that's the cusp of the 10th house of career, and that can be very front and center in terms of like the person's life and their public, so to speak. So that square, so Venus being aspected in a hard way, means that she didn't make a good impression on the public. Venus is your popularity, but squaring off to the midheaven means that there was some obstacle that prevented her from being able to have that appeal from the public, that they felt that way about her. Now, this is a bit exaggerated because, of course, she was a popular character, and I'm sure there were girls in high school that aspired to become like her. And just reading comments, to the Beverly Hills 90210 channel where they post little shorts on YouTube that I'm subscribed to. A lot of people seem to take her, they really liked her character Brenda compared to Kelly's character. And I always find that interesting, how people get so involved in things that are like fictional. But they do, and they mention these little details. And so, but I mean, we're not talking about a fictional character here. We're talking about Shannen Doherty. And your 10th house is your reputation. So there was something about her that it kind of prevented her from enjoying the full popularity that being a celebrity would have given to her. And again, I think that she probably, in some ways, was her own worst enemy. I don't know the particulars of what was going on behind the scenes, and they never really elaborated. So it's hard to really, I mean, yeah, the tabloids, would mention different incidents, but I don't know about those offhand. So I'm not going to even speculate. So the other thing that she had going on was an opposition from her Venus to her ascendant. And I had, I always, or a lot of times I'll check and see what people say online, so-called astrological experts say online about some of these things. And someone said that it means that the person's Venus is in the 7th house. Well, that's not true. You can't just go by, everybody doesn't have the same chart. And she actually had Venus in the 6th house of health, ironically, given how her life ended, where she was really under a lot of medical treatments at the end of her life. But the point is that it seems that it can be actually a very I hesitate to use the word attractive quality, because it is a hard angle. I mean, like, the reason I even looked it up is if I were going to interpret it myself, I would say that the person tries to be attractive, whether in their physical appearance or their mannerisms, and somehow it doesn't fly with the way that they express themselves. Like, there's something about it that kind of bounces back and doesn't really take, compared to somebody who has a conjunction with the ascendant from Venus or trine, that kind of thing. It's more cooperative, or it's more concentrated. And Venus can not only be beauty, but it can be that sense of, harmony. So to me, because the opposition is an inharmonious aspect to begin with, I personally think that it probably generates some of that. But I found some very positive things where they were saying that it can be very alluring, or I forgot how they put it, but something along those lines. And, there are some famous people who had it. Now, one person that I noticed had it is Kim Kardashian. I haven't done her chart. I mean, I have no desire to do her chart. I don't really know her personality. The little I know, I'm not keen on, so no offense to her. It's just like, that is totally not my scene. So maybe it would be interesting to do it regardless, to do Kim Kardashian's chart. And who knows, maybe she has Venus in the 7th house. She is a Libra. So in her case, trying to look beautiful can be in order to keep to keep a relationship. Like, that is of paramount importance. With Shannen, like I said, she did not have Venus in the 7th house. Actually, come to think about it, she had Chiron in the 7th house. So that may have actually been quite difficult for her in, various different ways. Having to do with relationships, not finding the right person. I don't know. Maybe she was, with somebody at the time of her passing, but sometimes that can lend itself to pain in relationships, and that could have been a very sore subject for her, possibly. And so, again, all of this is speculation. We don't know. I don't know her private life and what was going on, but I did want to talk about 2 more things. One of them was that she had her North Node in the 5th house, and it was in Aquarius. The 5th house is a house of love and romance and creativity. So definitely when somebody has their North Node in the 5th house, being creative, being an artist of some way, shape, or form is, probably, part of their destiny. If the person isn't doing it, then who knows, they might really suffer because they're not fulfilling their soul's mission. But that doesn't mean that they have to be on television or in the movies. That's not what I'm talking about. They can do it like in a community theater, or they could, they could paint paintings and sell them on Etsy. It doesn't have to be grandiose, or make jewelry or something. But interestingly, it was in Aquarius. So Aquarius is the sign of the collective, and it's ruled by Uranus, which is connected to technology. So it might have been pretty fated for her to, or, her destiny to work in this kind of industry where it was directed towards the collective. This entertainment was directed towards the collective in the form of technology. Also, because this is the house of love, because Aquarius is here, it may have been her destiny to be very independent as far as love is concerned. That doesn't mean shunning love, but not allowing it to kind of dominate. And the interesting thing about that is that it's something that you have to refine within yourself mentally, I think, because it's way too easy for people to express the lower nature of this, which would be to be very afraid of love. And I think that Shannen might have had that side to herself. Again, I don't know what her relationship status was at the end of her life. But that can happen too, where people use their past trauma or negative experiences as an excuse to kind of always have that distrust, and therefore keep people at arm's length, even in relationships. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And then in her 8th house, where she had this stellium, her sun was there. I have the sun in the 8th house, and it really lends itself to people who love the subject of psychology, transformational practices, death in all forms. So even like, what happens after we die, or what is the death process like, near-death experiences. I remember when I was first getting into spirituality, I loved past life recall, where, just anything about the secrets of the universe. The eighth house can be occult matters, and that Mercury is here, and Saturn. I've talked about Mercury. This is a very deep thinker, even though it's in the sign of Taurus. For her, would deepen her thoughts about things, but it might even be good for finances, because with the moon in the second house, she can have like a very, I would say, a rather conservative, fiscally conservative nature, where she might rather spend money than, save money than spend it. With the moon in the second house, it could be even fluctuation of income. So, and that's what the entertainment business, it is like that. It's kind of like feast or famine. So you have to get on top of your finances, because you're not getting a steady paycheck unless you're on a weekly TV show, which she was, not only with 90210, but what was the other show, Charmed, or if that's the name of it. She had Saturn in this eighth house, and that can be that the person has some kind, if somebody has some kind of trauma, they may react by being controlling or micromanaging. Saturn is about discipline, but in the eighth house, it can be excessive, because the person is triggered by events that have kind of that shadow element to them. And interestingly, it is also noted that such a person can have issues with sex, where they feel very inhibited, or they try to control it in some way. They maybe they don't like it. And this is something that is probably offensive to even speculate with her. But the reason I'm even bringing that up is because some of you may have Saturn in the eighth house, and these things are showing up for you somehow. And it might help you to see how that is affecting your life. But the fact that she has Pluto in the first house, that was one of the things that I was, looking at. And I really feel like a person who has these placements, it can impact their adult relationships or romantic relationships. But it could be good. I do think it can be good for finances, especially somebody who's taking over the finances, maybe of parents when they get older or what have you. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that... one last thing I wanted to mention is that her midheaven is in Gemini. And so that could indicate variety in the types of things that she does. Certainly anybody in her field, I do consider that communications in one way or the other. Because maybe just because they're talking, it's a form of communication. But yeah, I also feel that because she's ruled by Mercury, she probably would have made a good teacher or writer if she's never done either of those things in recent years. So anyway, I wish her to rest in peace. And I hope that you got something out of this. If you'd like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.